Hi there, this is Alvin, and welcome to the Kickstart Commerce podcast, where we share search marketing and domain investing strategies to help grow your business. In today's episode, our guest is Blessing Mpofu, the proprietor and chief editor of ChurchMag, the #1 resource for church technology, creativity, and new thinking. Today, Blessing and I discuss the trick that led to his early passions for writing and tech. Also learn what led a founding technologist and visionary to launch ChurchMag using the .ag extension. That's the country code for Antigua and Barbuda. Blessing also shares his journey from a subscriber to becoming chief editor of ChurchMag. We also discuss a highly viewed article Blessing wrote about surviving a pandemic exactly 1 year before COVID. And last but not least, Blessing confides in me with a few domain confessions. One actually inspired by Trevor Noah himself. And so with that, Blessing, welcome, and thank you for making time to join us today.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
No worries at all. It is interesting, brother, how I came across you. You have what we call in the domain industry as a domain hack in ChurchMag. So if you're listening, it is spelled out just like you hear it, church, but when you get to mag, it is m.ag. So I guess to kick things off, let's share with the listeners a bit about, who you are at a high level, your personal, your professional background.
I'm the editor-in-chief, very fancy name, title. It does sound a little fancy, but it's just, you just kind of do a bit of everything. So I'm the editor-in-chief at ChurchMag, which is it's a blog that originally started where we're talking to churches about how they could take advantage of technology. So church tech, church media. I mean, we've also got a podcast, but yeah.
So let's even go back. Like, I guess, have you always been involved online with the internet? And kind of walk us through kind of how you got introduced to the internet, and then I guess how did you even stumble upon ChurchMag?
Yeah. Man, I remember. Now this goes way back. How did I stumble across the internet? So I remember the first time we got a computer at home. It was, we didn't have a graphic user interface. So we used MS-DOS. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Some people might not know what that is. And you basically, use your command line prompts to do anything on the internet. And we're still using word processors. I think it was WordPerfect or something.
Yeah. And the old blinking processor.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, cursor rather.
Yep. And you sort of this monochrome, dull, boring screen. And then came Windows 3 and Windows 3.1, whatever it was.
Right.
And then 95. And I remember, dial-up internet. I don't even know if lots of people know what that is. And you plug in your modem to the computer and plug this thing into your landline, and you're listening to the sound, and you're like, I hope it connects. I hope it connects.
Well, and then you hope no one calls you while you connected.
Exactly. Or that somebody in the house doesn't want to use the phone, right?
Right.
Because that was the other thing. It's like you can't make a phone call while you're in the internet, and I think that I'd probably be. So I've always had a fascination, from when we got our first computer. And when we got our first computer, that's when I actually decided, I'm going to go study IT. So that's where I started. Yeah. And then, so I studied IT, and then the .com stuff was kicking off, and I was just like, whoa, this internet thing looks like it's cool. So I did some, what did we call it back then? Like a web designer or something. And we're building websites using HTML and
hand coding it.
Oh yeah. Everything was just line by line by line, and you just had to. And I think 2008, I mean, I'd always been interested in just building stuff and built some sites. I think I only had one website that went live, as a student. But then in 2008, I came across, I discovered WordPress, and I was like, yep, this is it,
Sold.
I was sold. And I've been using it since. I think it was 2008. long story short, I discovered that one of the reasons I love like building websites and all those things is because I just wanted to build a means to publishing. And I had this, I don't know if whether I could see where this internet thing had potential to go, but I'd always just been fascinated about the possibilities that it presented. I mean, I've done all sorts of different things from blogging for myself, which I've done for, I don't know, maybe over a decade now, consistently, somewhat, and other ventures. Including ChurchMag and a few other things I've done in terms of work I've done for other people, for friends, and work at work.
So
So
then,
yeah,
have you always been a writer at heart?
yeah. I'd always,
Really?
I'd always, yeah, I'd always love writing. I mean, I discovered words. My dad tricked us, you know.
Wait, you got to unpack that one. I'm like, are
Well,
you a writer at heart? My dad tricked us.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a bit of a tangent. So what?
This is
So
a
what
good
had
story
happened?
right here. So
So
what had happened?
what had happened was you got to do that, right? So my dad wanted to instill in us just a value and the importance of reading, right? And so before I mean, like preschool already, had me join the library and, do the whole thing. And then I had to decide, no, do I want a book? Do I not? Based on, does it have pictures?
Of course.
Yeah. So, and then as we grew up, this is what he'd do. He made sure we had a library membership, but then he would actually take us to the bookstore and buy us some books that he read when he was younger. So, for instance, Sir Arthur Conan, what's his name? Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, for example.
Yeah.
And then he would say something like, so we'd come home from the bookshop and you got a stack of books. And then he'd say, oh, have you read this one? You know what happened was this guy did da 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 da, says what happens and then stops. And then you're like, and what happened? And then he wouldn't tell us.
But it
So
piqued your interest.
exactly. So it piqued my interest. And then from there, I just kind of fell in love with words, with books. And somehow that sort of scratched or developed something in me,
Right.
or help me discover that I actually loved. I don't know whether that happened because of the books themselves or the books just unlocked something that was in me.
Yeah.
But then I discovered through books now, well, in hindsight, I can think of it that way, was a lot of my life a lot happens internally. So I think a lot. And so slowly I discovered, hey, writing is a way to help me not only just process my own thinking, but, engage other people. So,
Right.
yeah. So my first book attempt was when I was 13 on that WordPerfect computer. That MS-DOS 486, whatever it was, 386 or 486 computer, So have I always been a writer? In short, I'd say, yeah. I've always just written stuff. I mean, I've got stacks and stacks of journals, and I've always been interested in other people's ideas as well. So for me, the internet then became this amazing place because we could, besides building my own website and publishing stuff and writing things I thought and just putting them out there and having conversations with other people in like chat. I don't know if you ever did. I don't know how old you are.
But try me.
But there were the chat rooms, the MSN chat,
MSN, AOL, Yahoo.
AOL, Yahoo, when they were a thing, and you're like, oh, that's so cool. I was talking to a guy in the US or in Australia or somewhere. So I've always been fascinated by the ability to connect with the world and not just where I am as an individual. I mean, I'll blame my parents again. Somehow they helped us realize that the world was big.
Right.
The world was a massive place but the idea that I could connect with people on the other side of the world and they could hear my thoughts and I could have their thoughts and we could discover each other's worlds and have this time and geographic divide just being obliterated. At the end of that.
Right.
So yeah.
And so in an instant, it's like
Mm.
just life changing. Then,
Yeah. It's like, yeah. I mean, your worldview is almost, I mean, I don't say almost instantly, but in a way, your worldview can't be the same.
right?
Well, at least back then. I mean, now I feel like it's easier to find your tribe and then get lost in your own echo chamber. But back then, you never know what you'd find. I
Right.
mean, obviously, still now, but
certainly back then.
yeah, but back then there was just this innocence, I guess,
Right.
like, we're just trying to figure this thing out and wonder what it could be and try to imagine it. And in some ways, I wish I had better imagination back then, because I mean, who knows what I could have built,
right?
I mean, maybe.
Well, that was the thing, though. Like when you say, to have had a bigger or a better imagination back then, it makes me think about just coming along through the early 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, just the 90s. And so you look at the 1990s. I can remember kind of the same. I mean, you telling your story is almost me staring in the mirror in terms of, my parents. I believe I was a freshman in high school, got a computer, and then we got the internet. And then my dad, he figured out, oh, y'all are going to be on the internet all the time and I can't get calls. Well, we got to get a second phone line. We get a second phone line dedicated to the computer. But, little did I realize back then, and now looking backwards, you just start to realize like all the different advancements that happen early on. It's like when we think about the internet and how big it is today and like literally how big it will become tomorrow, like we've come a ways. From those 90s and all the different technologies that have come about. And so, you thinking about, man, if I knew then what I know now, how much would life, have been any different? Now, an interesting question for you. So how did you get your name?
My mom, my dad.
He's like, that's the simple answer, my mom and my dad.
What had happened was,
why Blessing out of all names?
Well, my mom and dad were basically just like, oh, we got a baby. Oh, it's a blessing. Okay, blessing. That's how I imagined it. I think they were basically just like, well, this is our blessing, and well, it's a blessing to us, and so then we're just gonna call him Blessing. And
so, what's it been like growing up with such a unique, rare treasure? Like, have you had awkward moments or like
all the time? I mean, all the time. I mean, so how do I say this? So
in a restaurant, Blessing. Order for Blessing. I'll take 1, 2, 3.
So what I've done, Starbucks is the worst. I don't know if that happens to you, but
Alvin, come on, really, Alvin.
No,
Alvin and the Chipmunks. So,
Theodore
we're in the same storm, different boat.
Oh man, so yeah, man, I all the time. I get it. So, I mean, we grow up going to church and everything, and church was like the worst place. I mean, I get a ton of coverage every weekend. But church people are the worst. Because, can I say that? I'll just say that. Because then you'd meet someone, right? And he'd say, John, you put your hand out, hey, John. And then I say, Blessing. And then they're like, oh, thank you. Blessing to you too.
And you're like,
but I'm like,
no,
we're doing the name thing. Exactly. So then that happens often. The other thing that also would happen often was when I would, how do I say this? So I'd introduce myself and someone say Blessing. And I'm like, what's your name? And I say Blessing. And then it's like, is that your name? And I'm like, you just asked me my name. So I'm telling you my name. And then they're like, but is it really though? Like, is that like your real name? And I'd say, yes, it is. And then, okay. So is that translated from another language, or maybe you're trying? And I'm like, no, that is my name.
Show me your license.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm just like,
So you've become accustomed to this then.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, and I think, probably the most interesting thing for me that I thought was unique, yet it was refreshing,
Yeah.
was discovering ChurchMag.
Yeah.
And then, as I was on the side and moseyed over to the about, and then boom, Blessing. And I was like, now that is interesting. Person named Blessing. Here it is, editor in chief over ChurchMag. And so I'm like, man, there has to be a story here.
Yeah.
But the story doesn't necessarily start with you in terms of ChurchMag. ChurchMag started somewhere, I guess, with somebody else.
Yeah.
I guess even years, almost I guess over a decade ago, right?
Yeah.
Or even before that.
Over. Yeah. So 2000. Oh man, what was that? 2008, 2009, ChurchMag started.
So then who started ChurchMag? And kind of walk us through that story all the way up to the point you joined.
Yeah. So a guy called John Saddington, quite a cool guy. He's built all sorts of interesting sites and tools, and he's always doing something. Is he in IT? He's a developer. I mean, he's okay. Yeah, he's built.
So he's a builder, visionary.
Oh yeah,
well ahead of the curve. Then.
Yeah. He's always like doing stuff that you just like. Wow, I didn't think about that. And he's built all sorts of interesting things. So he started. I mean, he did ChurchMag. I mean, later he would then do. There's an app called Pressgram. I don't know if there's Instagram. Yeah, a while ago. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. But then he was like, well, I don't like the idea of Facebook owning my photos, so I'm going to make my own app which publishes my photos with a filter that publishes directly to my WordPress website,
And he just built it one afternoon after lunch.
Well, I don't know. Well, the way he is, like his intensity, like, I mean, I'd probably think it was like maybe when he was half asleep because he's intense.
Wow. So once he gets it in his mind, man, he's gone.
Yeah. I mean, if I could just be as productive and creative as he is. Anyway, so John started ChurchMag, then I think, what was it? Church Crunch, and then became ChurchMag after. So Eric took over from John, and Eric had a good run.
So John is really much more like a starter, but probably once it gets to a point of just being manageable, monotonous, he's like, yeah, I'm out. I'm on to the next thing.
Yep, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Let me go build another app that becomes like a best app from on in the app store or something.
Gotcha. So then he's like, wash, rinse, repeat, next thing, wash, rinse, repeat, next thing. And then Eric comes on. And so I guess he's Mr. Stability in a sense. So he takes the reins and then starts growing it and nurturing it.
Yeah. I mean, Eric is Eric Dye. So as in DYE, as in.
Oh, I thought you said he died. I was like, wait, no. That was a twist of events. I was like, yeah, we just got the guy on the scene. And
no.
Oh my gosh. No, so Eric Dye, got it.
So Eric Dye, as in DYE, he's basically like, I'm not only a stability guy, but I'm also like the guy who establishes stuff. I don't know if he really thought about it that way, but that's what he did with ChurchMag. He built a core team, and kind of built out a machinery around different number of contributors and voices and partnerships that he did that for roughly close to 10 years.
That's a big run when you're talking about
it is.
When you're talking about the church, number one, but then in terms of where things were then, I mean, I guess in terms of ChurchMag, did you all start out from what was the perspective? Was it more of a church tech?
It was church tech. So the idea was that the church does a lot in terms of just serving people, helping them in their spiritual formation, but at the same time, meeting needs in their community. So we had this fascination of the tools that are being built, that are available, like how do we serve people in our churches, and how do churches serve their communities using tech and all this digital media that was developing. I remember looking at a series talking about responsive websites when that was becoming a thing, And so a lot of content, a lot of work went into, okay, let's help people or churches and nonprofits. Let's talk to them about how they go about creating useful websites that are also leveraging the most recent tech, So that's one of the things that we spoke into. Social media was also kind of becoming a thing. Facebook, and then later Twitter, and then Google Plus. I mean, Google Plus for us was amazing.
And why so? Like, why? How was it different from like a Facebook? Because I would have thought you would have said, "Oh man, Facebook was like the best thing that happened to us."
Yeah. I don't think we've ever cracked Facebook. We even today we haven't gotten Facebook right. I don't think we've gotten it right yet. But Google Plus, remember you had when it started out, you had these circles,
Right.
and you'd join a circle or add people to a circle, and so the people that were joining there were people who were obviously kind of like at the cutting edge, because they're always looking at what's the next thing or where's their potential. Some of the kind of person who would be on Google Plus and not know why, but just because they just wanted to explore possibility.
Right.
So people were looking for solutions, man. There wasn't enough information that really focused in on churches and nonprofits. And so people were just looking for stuff. And that's how I came across ChurchMag later on in about 2009, 2010, thereabouts, I think.
Mm-hmm. So what too long then after they started?
Yeah, not too long. But I would just read, I was just consuming content. I was involved in my own faith community, and I was just like, we're trying to solve problems. We were involved. So it was a new community, it was a new church. And what do we do about sound? Oh, and I could find that those, ChurchMag was the resource to go to. Oh, what do we do about websites? What about hosting? What are my options? So there was a lot going on. How do I make use of this Facebook thing? How do I think about what we're doing? And so it was a resource for me. And I read it for a couple of years. Then Eric basically just said, "Hey, if you're interested in contributing, da 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 da." And I'd been reading ChurchMag for a while, and I was part of the community, and I was thinking, you know what? Nah, the content that's on there is such great quality. I don't think I've got anything significant to say.
Now, were you commenting on any of the comment? I mean, on the content at the time?
Yeah, sometimes I would comment. Sometimes I just read and. Back then when you used to comment on blogs, there was a time, believe it or not. But I did, I'd comment. Sometimes I'd just read the content and that was it. And I was also subscribed to the newsletter, following on Twitter. Twitter is basically where we really enjoyed. And up to today, I think that I find Twitter, not just personally, but even for ChurchMag, how do I put it? Maybe a little more engaging, interestingly.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I know is there was a time, it would be interesting to look what it looks like now, but we discovered that we got more value from people following links to our blog from Twitter, tend to stay longer. So I was just part of the community, and then gave it a few years later. I got quite a lot of experience in another instance after being involved with the non-profit, and then moving cities and helping another church with other stuff. And I learned a lot more, and I thought, okay, maybe.
He said, maybe I got something to bring to this thing now.
Maybe. And I was like, you know what? I've been blogging forever, but I've never written what I'm writing about. Definitely fits the ChurchMag side. So,
wow.
What the ideas I had, I didn't want to put them on my personal blog because I felt like I'd gone a particular way with my personal blog that I just thought, you know what, I don't want to create noise. I want to be predictable in terms of when somebody comes to my blog, they're already expecting, because the people who've been following for a while, They're
Yeah.
expecting that I'm going to either talk about something about in general, like a reflection or lessons on life or
Right.
leadership. So then I just reached out to Eric and I said, yo.
He's like, remember that question that you had for me?
Yeah. So, and then Eric said, well, give me do you have 3 ideas for blog posts? And I'm like, sure. Yeah. Because I'd been like you're saying, because I write. And I said, so I almost immediately just gave him like synopsis for, just the headlines and a bit of synopsis. This post is going to be about. So 3 ideas, hit him up, and he's like, the next thing I open my email and it's like, hey, you've been added as an author on this blog. So I submitted, and I kept writing a little more because I got a bit of confidence to speak into that space. And I felt very validated by Eric and people who actually read. And the people finding my content useful. Long story short, Eric says to me, hey, dude, would you consider being a staff writer? And I'm like, whoa, because that staff writer basically meant core team. And I say to him, so what does that look like? What does it mean? And so I had to submit a minimum of one post a week as part of the core team, and I gave that a go.
Now that's interesting. Now and why it's interesting to me is knowing the backstory now in terms of your father tricking you into reading. You start reading, but then you have a fascination for words and a love for writing.
Yeah.
But then you reach this point to where, you get introduced to a computer, internet. And so you kind of got this tech thing going, but you got these words going. Yeah. Now, at any point, did you ever just realize and say, oh, I'm likely going to become an editor or a writer for life or a teacher? Like, did you have something else in mind in terms of a vocation or occupation?
I've always been, not always, but I think from the first time my hands went on a keyboard, I was like, tech is where I think what I don't fully understand what I'm going to do, but it's definitely going to be tech related. There's something about this computer thing. So
you essentially married the two, because when you think about writers, you think about typically, like paper, pen, or pencil. And you're writing this thing out versus it's like, you got the keyboard, you got the computer, but now it's connected to the internet. And so it's like, all right, my fingers then become the pen, the paper, and then that keyboard is like, that's my canvas. And then you start adding, hey, I purchased a domain, I purchased web hosting, and now I got a blog, and the whole world is, and as Aladdin would say, it's a whole new world.
Yeah. A whole new world.
Exactly. So at that moment, though, I guess, had it really crossed your mind to go, this ChurchMag thing, this is what I'm going to likely dedicate a good portion of my life to? Like, when did that ever come into mind, or going, you know what? I think this is my lane.
Gee, so long story short, because I feel like I don't know what it is about you that. So long story short, every now and then, in the back channel on Slack, Eric would say, "Hey guys, what do you think about? I was just thinking and wondering about this. What would you do if those kind of scenarios, because you're picking people's brains and that. So and as best as I could, as interesting, because interesting is an interesting word. It can mean anything, right? As interesting as some of my ideas were or might have been, maybe not even not. I'd always try and think of something. So
right.
Yeah. So Eric, once then this time he basically just writes this. So what would you do if ChurchMag was your baby? I was like, I would. So I'm throwing out ideas and all those things, and then Eric says, no. What would you do if ChurchMag was? And I'm like, whoa, okay.
And it just got real.
It just got real.
He's like, oh yeah, about the ideas that you're throwing out.
Yeah.
It's time to go implement and execute.
Yeah.
Was he looking to do something else, or because by this time I guess he's
Uh-huh.
what well into this. I mean, he's closing in
Yeah.
on 10 years by now, I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
yeah. I think he probably needed a break and needed to do
Right.
something else,
Because he had
because it
grown
take
that thing,
oh
right?
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, because
yeah.
so he took it from what do you think? How many users or visitors were you all reaching?
Oh my word. I don't know.
Because I'd
I mean,
probably say it's probably hundreds of thousands if I had to
yeah,
guess.
yep. I mean, Eric did like phenomenally, and I mean, obviously there were people. There was a core team. You'll see some of the names. Jeremy Smith, Phil Schneider, Chris Wilson. Like there were a whole bunch of other people
Right.
involved, but Eric really was like really captained the thing. He dreamt, he executed, and then I'm now going to speculate and maybe even speak a little out of turn, but maybe he just also needed a new challenge. I mean, he's still there,
Yeah.
he's still in the community, we're still friends, and yeah,
And I think that's how just like John, John is it probably would have been detrimental to
hmm
John to try
hmm
to have stayed that stretch of, let's say, 12 years, but he stayed that initial 1 to 2 years.
yeah,
And it's kind of like a track meet in terms of
hmm
just, or a meter relay race, a
hmm
relay race of just, hey, John had the first leg. Eric
hmm
had this second and possibly third leg, and
yeah,
it was time. It was just time for a
hmm
change. Not that anybody did anything wrong or
yeah,
any of
yeah.
that stuff. It's just a matter
No.
of, hey, this is just an ebb and flow of life.
hmm
And likely is the case. I mean, when I
hmm
think about it from a leadership standpoint, as a leader, you're likely grooming your people. And in this case,
yeah,
when he was playing the question game with you, little did you realize
yeah.
he's grooming you. It's
This
almost
is
like,
this is actually real.
yeah. Well, it takes me back to your
Yeah,
dad. It's the
yeah.
trick. It's the
Oh
trick
yeah.
again. It's the
I,
it's the
I
trick.
Man, I don't know what it is about people in that, right?
It's the trick. Well, what would you
Yeah,
do if? And then you're
if
like, oh yeah,
yeah,
I do this, I do that,
yeah,
I do this.
yeah,
And then at the same time, he's just asking you that probably periodically, and to the point
yeah,
that he felt like, okay, it's actually, this is the person who can take us
yeah,
to this next level, who's going
yeah,
to be able to go into this next season, and you
yeah,
were it. Now,
yeah.
from the opposite side, from your side,
hmm
like, what went through your mind at the given moment when you went like, and this just got real? Like, what were your thoughts?
The first thought was, what you been eating? Like, like you, man. I was just like, this guy is he serious? Like, are you crazy? And I'm like, whoa, he's serious. The first thing I felt was, I honestly was just like a bit of fear, actually,
Mm. Why
because
was that?
the legacy. I mean, I travel fairly regularly, different countries. Well, 2020 is a whole different story, and 2021 doesn't look like we're going to be going anywhere either. But but
Grab a
um
Snickers. It's going to be a
yeah.
long one.
Oh yeah, so I just, and a lot of places I've been in, some of the most random places, I'd meet somebody who says, "Hey, what ChurchMag? I've been following you guys, or you helped me during that period, and I found this solution, and I got this resource." And so for me, it was more than just the name recognition. It was more to do, as in, if I can use this term, the brand, ChurchMag, the brand. It was more than that. It was the fact that people were helped and they found something useful that
Right.
actually, then there's this legacy of, I mean, people know that's the resource I go to. If I need help, I'm going to go find it there. And can I sustain this thing? I mean, we're looking at about, I mean, there's some very terrible blog posts that we've slowly been taking down because there was a time when a 100-word blog post, well, let me put it this way, there's some tools now that are redundant or that are useless, that don't exist anymore, that we
Right.
critiqued, or that have
Right.
advanced. So I felt like it was a fear, but not just fear, but more of awe. because this thing has had such great impact. Would I be able to sustain it and really imagine it for the next level to continue serving other people and even make it bigger? And it's been a challenge.
And I suppose so, because to a certain extent, I mean, when I think about it, what I begin to sense was a bit of, and I think we all encounter this to some certain extent, a bit of imposter syndrome. Like, okay, I know what you're saying, but can I actually live up to the standard, or in some cases the hype? And can I live beyond it, and not just live beyond it just for my own sake, but for the sake of the community?
You
know, can I take it to the next level? Can I grow it? Is it within me to do this?
Yeah. So I mean, there've been some challenges, but I think it almost feels like, despite the challenges, I only feel like we're beginning to be in a place in terms of, as far as the pictures that I'd seen, that we're only now just beginning for me.
And how long ago was that then, that the whole question game with Eric happened, and then you basically, transition into this role?
You're going to laugh, but I think it was I know the month. It was the 1st of April.
He's like, yeah, that's happened on 1st of April. April Fools.
Yeah. Well, we had to kind of say in the post,
right? We're serious.
This is serious. It's 2019 is basically when so 1st of April 2019 is when I officially took over. So, domains, the accounts and the costs and everything that has to do with running it. And
And then so now, in terms of, so you had been a contributor, you just been, I guess, there in the community first, and then you became a contributor, and then you just kind of worked your way in. Not that you realized, I guess, that you were working your way into where you are today. And so obviously now you step into the helm here, leading ChurchMag. But now you get opened up to a whole new world of all the behind the scenes, all the accounts, all managing, hosting, email, all the moving pieces. And how is that, I guess, how has that changed from where you were from the previous position to where you are now?
So when you're a contributor, and this is, I mean, it's great. In fact, it's the best place to be. Because all you just do is just create stuff. You create content, and you feel the post is ready, and it gets to whatever it is, whether it's a video or whatever content, and boom, and then you
throw it over the fence.
Pending review, and then somebody on the other side then comes and takes a look at it and says, right, what's the tone like? The idea is the idea and the concept coming through. And now being on this side is quite interesting, because there's a lot more that you think about that you didn't think about when you were a contributor.
So you're in the future and the present, while at the same time making sure that we live based on the past.
Oh yeah. So you're thinking about a whole lot of things. Does this piece really come across great in terms of quality? And then the other side of it, you're thinking, but does it really? I've had to do things that I never thought I'd do. In some instances, I've had to say to some guys, dude, I don't understand what you're saying. Could you just rewrite this whole piece? Or, could you rewrite just that portion, or help me understand what you're trying to say? So then you've got this day to day, and you've got a lot of moving pieces in the day to day, and at the same time you're trying to think strategically. So it's this: I'm working on the site and on the podcast. In the site and in the podcast on the day to day, and at the same time you're also trying to work on it. You're trying to work in and above, and so when you're working on it, you're trying to think, okay, where's this thing going? You're thinking things like sustainability. You're trying to find partnerships. You're trying to, get some income just to make, because you need to pay the bills, right?
Right.
The server fees ain't gonna pay themselves.
No, they're not. No, they're not. And they will flip the switch on you too.
Yeah, and they won't care that you've been running for over 10 years or however long. So it's different kinds of stresses, and yeah. So
now, what about the digital strategy now in
Mhm.
terms of ChurchMag? Because I bet that plays also a role. Now, while you're saying yes, it is about the content, but it's also, about a digital strategy of how do you, obviously you're going to keep serving folks
Mhm.
with the content, but then is there this strategy? Because you mentioned that you have a podcast, so like
Yeah.
where did that come into play? Because I doubt that it's always existed, but
Mm.
where about did that come in and into the train of thought of like, oh yeah, this is an arm or a lane that we also need to run
Yeah.
into?
Yeah. So the podcast, I mean, the strategy basically for me now is at some point in ChurchMag, we were publishing probably maybe 3, even 4 blog posts a day.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I mean, like quite a huge pool, quite lots of stuff going on. That was but as a few years ago.
So that's
Well,
like 130 or 140 posts a month, right? Something like.
it got to a point where it was just ridiculous. But some of it was very helpful, and there was a big community, and people were contributing.
Hmm.
And so different things happened. One of the things that I thought about when I took over, I was just like, you know what? I'm okay for people to work on long form pieces that, even if it meant that we published like a couple of times a week, I'm cool with that. And so in terms of going forward and on the strategy, I think we want to create more sort of more of a resource style, resource. Basically, we want to just package things that people will be useful to people, whether that looks like a course that they can access, or whether that looks like we've got some ideas for other podcasts as well. The thing that we put forward first is how useful is this going to be to the community.
That's good.
We don't want to just write a podcast, not a podcast. Well, we don't just create a podcast for the sake of it, or piece of content because you're just publishing because you just to publish,
right?
So they're different things that we're looking at in terms of just how do we package content, how do we package resources in a way that will be helpful to our audience. We've had some ebooks back in the day. At church, we've got this little wing within that. We didn't talk about that, but you wouldn't have known. ChurchMag Press, where we basically just getting some ebooks. We had some ebooks done, and we're just kind of just trying to reimagine what that looks like again.
Is that ChurchMag, ChurchMagPress.com or?
Yeah, or ChurchMag. Well, you wouldn't that site. What we did was I just pulled it back into the.
Oh, you pulled it back into the main brand.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Got it.
And that on its own is, yeah. Phew, I was just double checking here while we're talking, but it's still redirecting.
Yeah, it does redirect. That's what I was checking too. I was like, well, let me see, ChurchMag.press. Let's see where this goes.
Yeah. So
he's like,
yeah, it still is. We're safe. And I mean, so that I think the challenge is basically recognizing where there's opportunities to serve your community or your audience, and then thinking about, you obviously want to think about like what's available, what resources and what skill sets do we have, and what's the community, what are they most like, how are they most likely to consume what we produce. So it's really more of a posture of service more than anything. I mean, if you can publish for the sake of it, but our mission is just to really empower and equip our audience the best way we can, because we only become valuable, if I am to speak in those terms, we only become valuable when we give value that's valuable, that our audience appreciates or perceives as valuable for them. And I think that the internet and the world would be a much better place if that's how we all thought, and not like, how can I, it's community basically says, how can I contribute
Right.
for our good versus what can I just get from you or get
Right.
from people. And I mean, those are just some of the guiding, I don't know, values or principles maybe in terms of what we try to do.
No, and that makes sense because as I look at the site, looking across the menu there, I can see and I can even hear it in your heart in terms of where it is that you hope, that you long for, that you even envision for ChurchMag going, which is, becoming a more well-rounded resource that is coming in or looking at things from all different perspectives, if you will, from different angles. But at the same time, like you said, providing that value and not just from a tech approach, but even from a philosophical approach. Now, you wrote an article, which I found interesting because I did go and read it. Would your church survive a pandemic?
Yeah.
And so the practical stuff. Now, here's what's interesting about this.
Yeah.
This was written on February 17th, 2020.
Yep.
Almost a year ago.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting was, if you're near a computer, just go to ChurchMag, so Churchm.ag, or just type in, would your church survive a pandemic? I'm pretty sure it'll come up in Google. Go read it. It's a great article, and it's definitely going to press some areas for you to think about. But what struck me the most was down at the bottom was the comment. It's so fitting to a certain extent because the person here that commented basically said, regarding your question about backup plans to deal with the pandemic, my church doesn't have any specific plans.
Yeah.
But it makes me think about how much time and effort we should put into contingency planning for unlikely events or being ready to gather, pray. So check this out. What was so interesting to me almost a year later is, if we rewind the clock, literally a year back, there were a lot of people, not just churches, but businesses included, small businesses, large conglomerates, who said, there's no way a pandemic could ever happen and could ever shut us down.
Yeah.
But yeah, here you are. And I think it's so critical and key because if you're leading any organization, whether you're a leader, but certainly in this case, in terms of ChurchMag, you're leading this organization. Like, what at that given, take us back to that moment that you penned this. Like, what was going through your mind that even gave you a sense to go, guys, y'all might need to actually be thinking about this stuff. Obviously, it's written for the church, but when I read it through the lens of, but let's take this at a practical approach. At the family unit, if you will. Then to the business, then to schools, then to churches, then everywhere else. And I go, man, there are a lot of people that were just caught off guard by this. So take us back to that moment a year ago when you penned it.
2020. Right? End of the year 2018. No, sorry, 2019.
Yeah.
I'm watching the news, reading things online. I can't say for sure like what really made me think, but I just read somehow that, wait a minute, this thing is actually growing. This thing is seeing what's happening in China and then I thought, hey, wait a minute. I remember the 1 year, because I've been to a few Asian countries. And when you're there, I remember the first time I arrived in my first Asian country, I was just like, this is weird. Why are they wearing surgical masks on the street?
Wow.
And we're talking like a few years. Because since the SARS H1N1 outbreak, I don't know if people would still remember that. It sort of became normal. Like if you had a flu or a cold in Asia, it's not anything surprising that you'd wear a mask because you're just being communal and you're thinking about people, right?
Right.
In some cities, it's like, some people just do it because of the smog. Right. So I'd basically been following the news, and then I thought, wait a minute. This thing seems to be spreading. And then I thought, well, if it came here, if it came to my city, if it came to my community, what are the possible implications? Because I mean, if it's happening in one country, what's the like? I mean, it's a disease that can spread. People travel. If it happens somewhere, then I don't see how we can be exempt.
Right.
So then I thought, well, what would that actually mean for our audience in the context of our audience, and what would it mean for the church if something like this happened? And one of the things I like about blogging is that sometimes you don't always need to have a fully formed idea. Sometimes you just need to start a conversation. And so I was open to that. And I just did that. And I tried to think as best as I could. I mean, I didn't write it as well as I wanted to, but I felt that I had enough questions for us to really challenge us to think, So I was like, yeah, listen, would your church survive a pandemic?
It was a very, very good article.
Yeah,
like you may not think so, but sitting from where I'm sitting, I can see, and also kind of looking back, 2020 is hindsight. Sorry, no pun intended there, but
I see what you did there.
It truly is looking backwards, and now I'm understanding it. I'm like, okay, I read your article, but looking back through the timeline of events that have happened, and even now as we wait to go, well, when will we get to normalcy? What will this new normal look like? Because we're not going back.
Yeah.
And so it's at the same time looking at when you wrote it, but at the same time looking through what you wrote through the lens of 2020, but then also kind of circling back around and going, man, if I'm looking forward, whether this is my church, whether this is my family, whether this is business, school, all aspects of my life, I'm looking through the lens of your questions, essentially.
Yeah. It was the second most read post in 2020.
It's so funny. So I go back to the moment of you where you had all the ideas, where you were with Eric. He was like, well, how would you do? What would you do? And what strikes me is, yes, you may have had all these ideas, but honestly, looking, and I get this sense of this article, like, yes, you're going to do great things for ChurchMag. You're going to go on to do some great things. But at the same time, I'm like, man, this was a critical moment in the path. And likely this article, looking backwards, and you just said it, it was the second or almost the top, viewed article on the site.
Yeah.
And I go, how many people have you helped through this article in terms of just questioning and going, okay, what do we do? How do we survive? How do we keep this thing going? Because the reality is this, and I think you and we talked about it in the pre-show. There are many churches who closed their doors.
And it's sad.
Right. It is. And they not, and so they closed their doors, and likely it's the same case. I go, because businesses, because people did not look through the lens of in which you wrote the article. Obviously it's written for church, but I come back to the questions and say, apply it to your personal life, business life, all these that they weren't able to make the pivot.
Yep.
They weren't able to make it.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. I think if there's anything that I take away, so largely 2020, I basically failed to do a lot of the things I hoped to do with ChurchMag or for ChurchMag or in or through ChurchMag, and partly it was the pandemic. But some of the big lessons that I took away, the first one is basically always just be aware beyond your immediate, have an awareness greater than your immediate environment. Because sometimes, to use this analogy, a big boat that's on a lake and a small jet ski that's a little further down the lake, a big boat could make some ripples that just kind of could potentially tip over a jet ski that might not be as close to it, but just because of the ripples. So I think we need to have an awareness beyond where we are. The rain or lack of rain in Ethiopia could determine the price of your coffee. I don't know, in Seattle. People.
Right. Well, I mean, think about it. A hurricane typically comes off the west coast of Africa.
Yeah.
And I've always,
Yeah.
weird as this is, I've always thought, I was like, man, you know what? I'd love to be on the coast of Africa at the moment and have God, and have God go, hey, you see that little wind that just moved that?
Yeah.
That's going to hit the U.S. in about 7 days as a Cat 5 hurricane. Just to kind of ride through the process, because as much as we think that we live in our own little echo chamber or our own little isolated bubble, if you will, I'm like, man, we are actually, because of the internet, because of the advancement of technology and all these things, we're actually closer together than what we really think.
Yep, we definitely are. And so we can't live in a world where we just think it's only what's happening in your country or only what's happening in your city that impacts you. There's a whole lot of other things. I mean, the world is a very big, small place. and so that's the first thing, is always just have this awareness in terms of whatever you're doing or working on or building, whether it's a product you're building or even just your website or your podcast. Think about, there are things that are happening that you might not think will affect you. And I'm not saying that people then need to live in this fear of like, oh, there's something that could happen, but it's just saying, okay, that's interesting. I try and read news and different news sources from different parts of the world. And then the second thing was that we have to be agile in the way that we do things. And this actually came from a conversation that I had with someone on my on the ChurchMag podcast, Bobby Gruenwald.
Yeah.
He leads the team that builds the most used Bible app in the world. And
he's with Life.Church, I think, right?
Yeah, Life.Church. Yeah. And he says that we often worry too much about like, where's the puck going? What's the next thing?
Right.
And Bobby says he doesn't look at things like that. But I mean, they've built amazing digital tools and solutions. His philosophy is, what can we do to make sure that we're always agile, we're always nimble, and that we can respond quickly to opportunities as they arise. And so if there's anything that I learned is, lessons from 2020. The second one, it really is that, you have to be agile. You have to really think, how can I make it, like, how do I position myself in that I'm able to respond to something quickly, or new opportunities or new challenges, like with COVID. Lots of people for years have been saying you need to have an online presence. You need to have your store, not just brick and mortar. You need to, set up your online shop. And they're like, no, man, I want to interact with people. And then what happens? 2020, social distance. You got to close your shop doors, and sadly, a lot of people, they're not going to open them again.
Right.
So have an awareness just a little beyond where you are, and be agile and build whatever you're building. Do your best to be as agile and nimble as possible.
No, that's good stuff. And I think that's, even for our listeners, for domain investors, domain developers, domain brokers, and the like, I think that's the same lesson, or not even same kind of lesson. That's one of the tenets of life that you really just have to personalize, whether it's you at a personal level or a team of people, of just being that free, being that flexible, to be agile. And I have to do the same thing in terms of managing this podcast, managing my blog content, managing the domain names, managing my personal life, my marriage, being a husband, being a father, being a leader, being a friend, all of these things. And it's very much, to that end of what you just said. Now, speaking of intentionality, I know that probably some of our listeners, most likely the domain investors, in terms of the intentionality behind domain names. So, will ChurchMag ever purchase ChurchMag.com, or had that thought ever crossed your mind, or not really?
Well, it has crossed my mind. The problem is it's just the restrictions of the cost. I wonder how much it is now at the moment.
As I hear all of my listeners now on the keyboard, like, oh my gosh, let me go over there and see.
Yeah, I mean, I have thought about that and I have looked at that, and then I've just thought, I don't think I've got the resources at the moment to, somebody else has it and it's not being used. So the next best thing that I do is we've got ChurchMag, which, as weird as it is, when we started out, I mean, Churchm.ag, as weird as it was when we started out, somehow we, obviously under the leadership of Eric, got something right to get the kind of reach that we got.
Yeah, you have I mean, to a certain extent, while, and many folks will say .com is king, and it's like, it is. Mm-hmm. And it's also had a almost 40-year head start too, over some of these other extensions. But when I look at ChurchMag, so Churchm.ag, then I look and I go, man, you actually have a unique brand.
Yeah. I mean,
a unique identity.
We do. And I can't get credit for that. I can't get credit for that, So it's we're reaping the benefits of Eric's foresight.
Right. Now, do you all have other domains in terms of the portfolio? Because I think you mentioned earlier in the interview that of sitting where you sit now, it's like you got to be responsible for all the accounts, the hosting, the web, the email, the domains.
Yeah, there are the domains that are linked to us and some of the projects we've done in the past that we've sort of shut down, I guess.
But you use them as redirects, right? I think in most cases.
Yeah. At the moment, we're using them as redirects, and for a number of reasons. First of all, we've spent a lot of time building them up. At that time, I mean, there were some projects that sort of had some life. They didn't get the kind of life that we were looking for, or it was capacity issues, and we just had to be real about what we could and couldn't do at that time. But that's not to say, but we still have purpose for them, and not just as redirects, in the sense that, so there are some ideas that we have where we will either reboot that, or we would redirect some of those to very specific projects and pages on our main site. And so we're not rushing to get rid of anything at this point, because it's valuable real estate for us in the sense, I mean, obviously from the reputation side, but if you get a prime piece of land, then you want to make sure that you're wise about what you do with it. And for us, the domains that we have, we feel add value to our community. They're involved in delivering value to our community in a certain way.
Now, how many do you all on? I mean, is it like 10, 20, or are you talking about thousands that you?
Are you talking about just ChurchMag?
Yeah, just the ChurchMag itself.
Oh man, let me see. We've got a few.
Because then at a personal level, you do have your own domain. You have an interesting one there, because you're using what is it? Blessing.im, which is almost like I'm blessing. I'm a blessing. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, so we do have a number of domains. I don't know how many. Maybe 10, I guess, on the ChurchMag side.
Yeah, and so it's not a huge portfolio, but you definitely have your brand.
Yeah. I mean, for you, I mean, by your standards, that's not a huge portfolio.
Right.
but you are right. In relation to us as a brand, certain domains really matter to us. Yeah. And we obviously would want to guard and protect that, because we want to leverage it for value for our audience. And then on a personal level, I don't know how many I got.
He's like, on a personal level, man, I've scooped up so many of these things. I have so many different ideas.
Well, you know what I do when I have an idea?
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I feel a keyboard involved in a credit card
Exactly. I mean, the first thing I do when I have an idea is I actually check domain availability.
As,
I don't know if I'm the only one,
no, I hear other people laughing right about now, like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's us.
Yeah. So so these are my confessions.
Your domain
My
confessions.
domain confessions.
As somebody runs out right now, it's domainconfessions.com available.
Yeah.
Let me
I mean,
see.
I did stupid things. I mean, there was a time, for example, I was watching what was it, Daily Show? Trevor Noah makes a joke and he says, he was hosting an artist, and he says, "Oh no, maybe we should call you Hip Hop Pepperoni." So I was like, "What?" I went online, Hip Hop Pepperoni, hiphop.pepperoni.com, and I'm like, and then for some weird reason, my domain, the service I was buying domain on, decided to give me a discount, so I bought it for $3.
Oh man!
And then year comes around, do you want to renew? I'm like, hell no.
What was I thinking? I had that TV on. Let me turn this thing off before I go broke registering stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, because the internet for me it's not like this thing I have. It's just a normal part of life.
It's been there.
It's an extension of So you get
and we somewhat know what life was without it.
Oh,
and so and I go, man, that is like we sit in. I don't know that we realize the seat that we sit in terms of knowing. And it's not just, hey, I was born in 1988.
Yeah.
No, it's like, no, if you were born anywhere from 70 to 80, it like you certainly remember.
Yeah.
Before the internet, and then when the internet happened, and now where we're at today, and that's just an interesting, for lack of a better word, interesting seat to sit in, to have that vantage point. So
from rewinding VHS tapes to take back to the rental, and
I tell them, I'm like, 8-track cassette. What was it? The CD, DVD, and then right into Napster.
And now we're talking about streaming onto 4K screens and
8K, 16K. It's like
Anyway.
So then wrapping up, so what would be your advice to someone that has heard this story? They think about ChurchMag, and they want to start their journey into publishing. Like, where should they start?
Get a domain. Is that the correct answer? Ding, 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 ding.
Exactly. Get a domain. But then what's the next step after get a domain? Do not get caught in the loop of get a domain, get a domain, get a domain, get a domain. How do I get off this thing?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me has been, how do I say it? So I follow, I've forgotten who they are, what their name is on Twitter. And one of the things that they say, there are many bad writers who've written and published books more than you.
That is true. I laugh, but that's true.
So I think that the time that we live in, I'm actually surprised I'm even saying that. It doesn't make sense not to get started. You never know. You'll be surprised what resonates with people, with other people. And chances are, if you have a thought about something, or you're trying to solve a problem or anything, or it's just sharing your own reflections, or you're trying to do that for your own business, I think you should just go ahead and get started and do it. Commit. Don't knock something off before you try,
Yeah.
I mean, somebody knitted mittens for Bernie Sanders, and then now we know about them in the other end of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to put something out there. And the other thing that we tend to we tend to think is that, but I don't think this is valuable for me. But you're not the one who actually determines the worth of something. It's the person who's on the receiving end. So you put out whatever you're putting out there, and the person who finds value in that is a person who'll be helped. So I hope that we can, in the truest sense, we can practice Ubuntu. It's what we call it in South Africa. Nelson Mandela spoke about it in that, I am because we are.
Right.
There's something about my contribution to the world and to people. So I'd say just get started, man.
It's like, get started. Let nothing hold you back.
Yeah, get started. Put it out there, and you'd rather course correct in motion,
right,
than a good plan is better than a good executed plan is better than a perfect one.
Yeah.
That's never executed. Try something, And the thing is, if you're going to get good at anything, you're going to have to make peace with probably putting out a few things that suck at first, but you only get better by doing, and you only change other people's lives or add value to other people's lives, or even your own business or organization or own life by, putting something out there for other people. And that's really the nature of whether it's business or whatever it is. Value comes back when you've put something out.
Totally.
Anyway.
Totally. Yeah. And if value doesn't come back, feedback to us.
Exactly.
and you get to take it, and you get to assess it, and you get to decide, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to grow bitter, or am I going to get better? Now, last but not least, is there anything else like that you want to share with listeners in terms of if somebody listens to this and they go, man, I'm inspired by Blessing. I'm inspired just to hear his story, but I have questions about this or that. Like, how should they contact you?
Yeah, I mean, hit me up on Twitter, Blessing Mpofu. So it's BLESSING MPOFU. So that's my handle.
Wait, me?
Hey, I'm spelling my name.
Oh, my bad. Sorry, I got lost in translation. I got lost. I was like, wait, hold on, man. I'm like, hey, this is a kid show. Wait, family show. Family, kid friendly. This guy just shooting off at me. I'm like, wait, no, you were spelling your last name. Got it.
Yeah. So that's my Blessing Mpofu. So that's my Twitter handle. And probably the best would be to go to my blog, and you can just hit contact or connect or something like that. And you can drop me some lines there. So blessing.im. And and I think, as you've said with ChurchMag also, it's just the same, Churchm.ag. Yeah.
So with that, we're out of time. So Blessing, thank you again for joining us today and sharing your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yep. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Kickstart Commerce, where we share search marketing and domain name strategies to help grow your business. Please subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or Podbean. Last but not least, please visit kickstartcommerce.com to subscribe to the newsletter sharing tips and tricks about the disciplines of digital strategy. Thanks. And that's all for now.